What we're going to be looking at in this video is 4 legal aspects and 4 laws which relate to computers specifically. The first one which we're going to take a look at is called the Data Protection Act. And essentially what this act does is, before its creation, we were starting to see companies where they were storing information about people, and then computers enabled them to process that information massively more than was done before. And if the act hadn't come out, it would potentially be possible now for you to get everyone's email address, everyone's phone number, and automatically phone people up, send them junk mail and various other processes. So to try and protect people within the country with respect to their own personal data, the Data Protection Act was created. And it has a number of principles. The most key ones of these we'll look at now. So the first one is that data, so that's personal data about people, can only be used for its collected purpose. And what this means is that if I collect some information because I want to send you a product which I'm selling you, then I can only use that information in order to sell you that product and deliver it to your address. I can't use it to then go and advertise things to you. And you'll often notice that on things where you fill in your personal details, there will be these tick boxes where you can give them extra rights beyond this to then go and send you junk mail or to give your information to third parties. But on its own, I can only use the data for what I've told you I'm going to use it for. So carrying on from that, I cannot pass the information to third parties. So if I'm one company and I get your personal information, I'm then not automatically allowed to pass that to another company. It is possible that you can give further consent by ticking a box which says that a company can pass your information on. Next principle is that users have the right to access their information. So any company which stores information about you, you have the right to say to that company, could you please send me all of the information which you have on me that's personal, and they then have to send it to you within a certain period of time. And they can ask a small fee of up to £10 to cover some of their costs in doing that. The next thing is that the information which is stored about you must be kept up to date. And the final point is that organisations which are storing information must make reasonable efforts and have adequate security measures. And it's not just good enough to say I've put in a firewall or I've got a password on my computer. These need to be both technical security measures and also human security measures. So if you're running a company, it might be that technically you have things like firewalls, antivirus, that maybe you use encryption if you're storing very personal details, but it will also be the personnel side, the human side of it, which means that you won't allow employees that have lost their job, you'll instantly stop their passwords so that they can't access information which is personal. And it may be other various measures which you put in place to make sure that your staff are trained and you feel that that information is held securely. The next aspect of law that we're going to look at is health and safety. And this is often seen as the slightly boring one. However, companies have to make sure that they are keeping their employees safe, and when people produce new products, they have to make sure that they are safe and fit for their purpose. So the obvious ones which we know about health and safety is things like you're sitting on a chair and you should be able to adjust the height so that it's the correct size for the computer which you're going to use. Now, actually, you don't have to provide adjustable chairs in every single situation. However, if you were providing an employee with a chair which they were going to use every single day at a computer and it wasn't at the correct height, then potentially you may not be keeping up with the health and safety regulations. However, if you were providing a chair which was going to be used maybe for 40 minutes once a week, then it may be perfectly okay that that's not in the perfect position as long as it's acceptable for the level of use which you're using it for. Another one on health and safety, it may be that if somebody's experiencing problems with their hands from typing too much, you might provide an ergonomic keyboard or an ergonomic mouse in order that you're making a safer environment for them. But it also gets into areas, for instance, which are more interesting, such as if you're in a concert with large speakers and maybe you're in the sound and music industry, then you're going to need to consider that if your artists are standing right beside the speakers, they need to be wearing some kind of ear defence, maybe internal earplugs, or the speakers need to actually be sitting in front of them rather than behind them so that they are kept in a safe environment. And it even gets on to more lately MP3 players, many of which are now being restricted in how loud they can go within Europe because of regulation that says that MP3 players should not be having their output too big to damage people's hearing. And so health and safety is generally there to keep employees, to keep users of products safe while they're using computers or computer systems or products. The next piece of legislation that we're going to look at is called the Copyright Designs and Patents Act. And it'd be impossible to, in a short video, tell you everything about this act. It's a huge act with lots of different areas which it covers. However, we can look at the key basics, which you probably already are reasonably well aware of. It covers things such as videos, books, and most importantly, from a computing perspective, it covers software. One thing which is very interesting about copyright is the second you produce something, that is automatically copyrighted. You don't have to write the word copyright or the C with the circle around. It's automatically copyrighted. However, to help out, we do put copyright at the end of works. We put the name of the person who created it, and then internationally we put a C with a circle around, and then we add the year on as well so that people know when that copyright actually starts. Copyright software is particularly interesting. By default, if you produce a piece of software, even if it's just you producing your very first computer program, that's copyrighted and nobody else can copy that software without you allowing them to. When you purchase software, you buy a right to use that software, but not to give it to other people and make copies of it. There are, though, different types of software. One of them is freeware. And so this gives you the right to have the software, but not to see how it works inside. So it's called free, so it's free software, freeware. So you can then copy that and give it to other people. They can use it freely, but they're not allowed to actually see inside and make modifications to it. There's another type of software, which is open source software. Source comes from the source code, so the code which actually makes the software work, and open because you're allowed to see that source. Open source does not mean that it's actually free in terms of money. So most open source software doesn't cost anything. Some open source software, you will actually have to buy it. The big difference on open source software, though, is you can see the code which is underneath that software, and if they've allowed you to, you can make changes to that code as well. The final piece of legislation which we're going to look at is the Computer Misuse Act. And everybody always says you're not allowed to hack or you're not allowed to crack passwords and all these other various things. This Computer Misuse Act is what deals with the misuse of computers, essentially. And it really comes down to two parts of the law which are of most interest to you, probably. The first one is unauthorized access. So if you're not allowed to use a computer and you go and use it, so either you break someone's password or you discover someone's password and begin to use it, that comes under the Computer Misuse Act and unauthorized access to computer material. And in this case, you're obviously not allowed to do it, and it depends on exactly what you're doing and how serious it is. But the potential punishment for this is 6 months imprisonment or a £5,000 fine. And the £5,000 fine is currently at the moment, however, it can change. The second type of thing which you're not allowed to do under the Computer Misuse Act is gain or do any unauthorised modification to computer material. And so this part of the Act covers, for example, viruses. So a virus gets onto your computer, it then is unauthorized, it's not something which you wanted there, it modifies your computer in some way, or it uses your computer resources in some way that weren't authorized. This is breaking this part of the Computer Misuse Act. And it's got exactly the same penalty, which is up to 6 months imprisonment and a £5,000 fine.